There have been a ton of sports games over the years. This means there is a huge library of titles out there, including good and bad games. Over the years, a lot of polarizing opinions and quite a bit of disdain for certain companies have developed. But what I've learned with College Football 25's release is that it is by far the most polarizing game in sports gaming history, with everything about the game having a large debate, with both sides being correct in their own way. But in my opinion, College Football 25 could be the catalyst for very beneficial discussions about the future of sports games. Let me explain what I mean. Before we get into the game itself, you have to understand that college football has had a 10-year hiatus since the last release. This means there's going to be an obvious level of hype towards the game, but it also might create a little bit of bias towards if they think the game is good or not. After all, the hype for the college football games never went away, only the games did. However, on the other side of the coin, a lot of people understand that this game is developed by EA Sports, and they look at all of the games they've had over the years since college football has been out last, and they see all of the mediocre product that's been released. And they automatically will have some negative feelings towards EA Sports, which will naturally bleed into their opinion on College Football 25, even if they haven't seen or played it. They've also had a lot more time to develop the game. Sports games are traditionally a yearly release cycle, but College Football 25, due to their hiatus, has had a bit more time. If you look at the 2021 tweet on their announcement, you could assume they've had at least a couple to 3 years of development time, potentially more. Because they've had extra development time, you'd have to assume that the game is going to be better than the games that only have a year to actually come out and develop. You at least expect to have a better product. So if it ends up being a slightly lackluster product or potentially not good enough given that they have more time than your normal yearly release mediocre products that we normally see from EA, you start to be a little bit upset, because what's the point of having extra development time if you're not going to fully utilize it to the most potential? This is only one debate that we're seeing with College Football 25, and this is strictly talking about development time and developers in general, and has nothing to do with the game yet. If we look at something like gameplay, for instance, I think it's actually pretty refreshing. It feels fast-paced and engaging, which makes it exciting to play for a lot of different skill levels. It plays very much like a sports game from the older generations, and if you saw my previous videos and you saw this graph specifically, you'd know that that was the peak of sports games for a lot of people. The inputs feel snappy and precise, and there's a lot of cool innovation that they've added to the game. It feels fun to play. This does not mean the gameplay is perfect, as there are gripes to be had. There's a lot of things that you might find within the gameplay that just isn't really that polished. You always seem to have those traditional AI issues where you find them going rogue, but you also have physics issues and animation issues and a defensive structure that feels like there's no point of even being on the field at times. But these balance issues are apparent, and a lot of people are justified in thinking that the game isn't quite perfect at times. Unfortunately, these seem pretty natural for sports games these days, so thus begins the debate. For a lot of people, College Football 25 feels very fresh, and its fast-paced arcadic style of play is very fun and enjoyable of an experience that's very reminiscent on games that were very good back in the day. But on the other hand, a lot of people like a more realistic experience when it comes to their sports games, and it's something that people have been pushing for a very long time. They want these games to be more realistic, as you are emulating the real-life sport variant. So you want the gameplay to resemble the real-life sport equivalent as much as it possibly can. College Football 25 doesn't feel quite as realistic as a lot of the other games you might see in past releases, but it's fun, and that sparks the debate. College Football 25 feels fresh and fun and has a little bit more of an arcadic style, but it isn't that realistic, professional, polished type of system that a lot of people are looking for from their favorite sports games. It's something that a lot of people have been pushing, but because we're going backwards now, it feels odd that now we're all of a sudden thinking that it's a fun game when you're trying to get things more realistic, or at least that's what you'd think. So there's another debate point that we're seeing with College Football 25. You then could even move on to something like your favorite game modes. Dynasty Mode is very fun, and it's really cool to build up all of these Division 1 programs from a small contender to potentially a national champion. The recruiting system is cool, and it's almost like a mini game within the game. It's something you can go either completely crazy with, or you can do just enough and move on to the other things in the game mode. There's a lot of cool small management things, and it's a very unique experience that you might not find in other sports games. That being said, there's a ton of bugs and issues that plague Dynasty Mode, unfortunately. One of the biggest ones that I find is that the Super Sim feels almost random at times, and unfortunately can really deteriorate the experience with a lot of very questionable things that might show up in the simulation. As well, it almost seems criminal to not be able to edit players or something like jersey numbers, especially when the game seems all about customizing your experience to fit whatever playstyle you want. While there's some very cool features that are found within Dynasty Mode, it almost feels a little bit empty, and this seems to be a common theme with the game itself. I'm all for a slimmer game, as it means that there's potentially more detail that's being done in these other game modes that are present in the game. But if there isn't as much detail to the modes that are currently present in the game, or there just isn't as much polish, or there's a lot of bugs that are plaguing the experience, it certainly feels disheartening knowing that while it is a slimmer game, it almost feels like a more bare bones game, which begs the question of why have that extra development time if you're not going to fully utilize it and make a more detailed game. There is a lot of good and a ton of replay value found in College Football 25's game modes. But when you consider that this is basically a 10-year hiatus from the last game, which was College Football 14, for a game that had multiple years to be developed, it feels a little bit bare bones and honestly a little bit rushed. In my opinion, College Football 25 probably needed another year or so to really get that polish right, and it would be potentially a great game. Okay, all this rambling, what does it really mean? Well, for the first time in a long time, there's a sports game out there that not only has negative thoughts or debate points, but also has a lot of positive thoughts. College Football 25 has a lot of positive, and there's a lot of people that are enjoying the game. It's fresh and new, it's fun after all. But there's also a lot of problems with it. It is by no means a perfect game. It has a lot of flaws. This is very justified for people that are a little bit on the hating side or the negative side, where a lot of sports games for a long time only had negative points. Everyone agreed that the games weren't very good, so there was nothing to really have a debate over because you'd bring up a topic and everyone would agree. But for the first time, there's people that are on the opposite side, where there are positives that can come from College Football 25. It's a game that's made a ton of different strides and honestly is doing something a lot different than what you might find from all these typical sports games. It's fun and built purely off of a passion project, which raises a ton of different talking points about how games should be developed in the future. I'm not saying that College Football 25 is perfect, it's far from it, but at the very least, it opens up a conversation and a ton of debate on various topics in the sports gaming development world on how games should look in the future. The big question is, what will college football do now? Very early on, they seem dedicated to making the game better through updates and patching a lot of things that a lot of people have had a ton of feedback on. If they can do it right, it opens up yet another conversation about how they should really use fan feedback to make the games better over time and pretty efficiently. The game's only been out for less than a week, really. College Football 25 is the most polarizing game out there, but it's a positive polarizing, because it can actually open up conversation to make the future of sports games better. Subscribe if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.